Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Thanks for stopping by. If you wouldn't mind, hit the like button before you leave. That helps out my channel a great deal. And leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you have to think about what I'm doing. Suggestions, ideas for videos are always welcome. Constructive criticism is appreciated. I've had these Orthoceras fossils that are cut into little cabs for a long time, and I've made a few pendants out of them before, but I thought it might be kind of fun to make a bracelet with a couple of them. And I had a lot of ideas as far as what I was going to do with it, and I'm going to go with something kind of streamlined for this one, but there's a couple of designs I think that I was thinking of that I might try at some other point too as well. Before we get started, let me thank a few people. Thank you to my YouTube subscribers. We passed 5,200 subscribers just recently. I really appreciate all of your support and your kind words. Thank you so much for that. I need to thank my patrons over on Patreon. I really appreciate their support as well. They're paying for my premium content, and I really appreciate their financial contributions in that way. That keeps me in supplies. Thanks to you guys. Appreciate that. With that being said, let's get started on these guys. Okay, so I'll show you these guys. I was eating some M&Ms earlier, can you tell? Here's a couple of little Orthoceras fossils, and I think they're kind of cool looking. They got interesting pattern in them. They were actually a creature that had little tentacles, like they're a type of baculite, I believe, which are related to ammonites. So they had kind of a sea creature that had little tentacles coming out. So a couple of things we'll have to deal with these. One, they're cut rather crudely, and so the bezel that we do, we may have to do a little creative filing on the bezel to make it match up nicely along this ridge, and it's going to be a little bit different on each one. So yeah, so that we'll have to deal with that, and we'll do a little bit of filing or dremeling to take care of that. The other issue is the bottoms of these are kind of rounded, so we'll want to. So the second thing that we have to deal with is the curved bottom on them, and that creates a situation where we'll have to build up a platform for it that has kind of a hollow center in it for it to sit down out of tag board, or what I usually use for backing on closed bezels, to make it sit in there nicely. So that's the other thing we'll have to deal with. I love these little books, they're great. The little dots that are in the form of the grid make it much easier for me to draw stuff, keep it proportional. So this is the first thing I drew up, since they have little tentacles that come out. If you put something like this, and then I was going to have them with the tentacles kind of holding them together like that. I thought that might be kind of fun. I may do something like that in the future. This is sort of a variation of what I settled on. It'll be a bangle rather than a cuff like this one, but I'm not going to solder them together, and I'm not going to angle them out that far. Some other things we thought of, my wife helps me come up with designs sometimes. So she thought it might be cool to have the tentacles of the Orthoceras creatures kind of interlocked like that and facing each other. And I thought if we're going to do that, we'll probably have to angle them a little bit, because the distance between these two like this would be pretty big. And if you're doing it, I mean, I suppose you could do it this way, but it's still going to be a pretty wide bracelet then, or you could do it this way, but then if you do it this way, it's going to stick off to the edge of your wrist, and I have relatively big wrists, so that's going to be probably an issue. What you could do is make your bracelet in the shape it's going to be, and then solder them down at an angle like that, and then intertwine the tentacles, or intertwine the tentacles and then solder it down, one or the other. So that's a good possibility. But I think this is kind of the final thing, where we just got them at the ends of these, and I'm going to leave it as an open bangle like that, so you have to push it over your hand like that, but it'll be a little bit adjustable. But I'm going to use pretty thick wire for the actual thing. I'm using, I think it's number 4 low dome half round wire from Rio Grande, and it's a pretty stout stock, so I think it'll stay pretty stiff. So first things first, I think we need to make some bezels for these, and I'm going to use usually use 3/16" fine silver bezel strip, and this particular stuff is 26 gauge because it's a little thicker, and I want something to be pretty durable if it's going to be a bracelet part. So I occasionally use a little thinner stuff, but for this I definitely want to use the thicker stuff. Alright, I'm going to flatten it out a bit. And then with these kind of things, I'm going to have to make a sharp bend in this before I shape the rest of it. That'll make it easier to get it tightly around it. So let me file the end first. Alright, so rather than trying to start it at the end or something like this, people are tempted to do things like that with pointy stones, but that's usually a bad idea. It's usually best if you're going to end up with it in one of the long sides like that. So I'm going to make a sharp bend in advance. This one, like that. And then we can kind of work from there. Kind of keep it flat on the table, and I'll just wrap that around the rest of the way. Make sure everything's touching nicely, and then when I mark these, I usually overlap it just a tiny bit, about as thick as the needle on my pick, just to give me a little room to file it and clean it up and everything. Just unpacking from my show that I did this past weekend in Loveland. It was a good show. I saw a lot of people that I've seen in the past, people who've known me for a long time. If you were one of those, thanks for stopping by. It was nice to see you. I get quite a few repeat customers, people who look for me every year at those shows. The one in Greeley that I just did, and the one in Loveland. I've been doing those shows for, I don't know, 15 or 20 years. So you kind of build up people who remember you and want to come look at your stuff again each year. Okay, if you've never seen one of my videos, I use hard silver sheet solder pretty much all the time. And I use a spray-on flux called My-T-Flux. I occasionally use easy solder for something, but there's only a couple of situations where I usually have to use it. Now I'm just going to reshape it, and I'll probably just pick one of these corners that I made when I was making the bezel and use that as the sharp corner. Where'd you go? There you are. We did pretty good on size there. Some of these, on the bigger ones, you probably have to use like 1/4 inch bezel if you're going to bezel set some of these. I have a few bigger ones that I would probably not be able to get by with this bezel. So I do keep some 1/4 inch around for tall stuff like that. So on the bracelet itself, I'm going to use, like I said, that half round wire that's a low dome half round. That's a little bit wider and not as tall as regular half round. So this is going to be kind of a bypass bracelet like this. And I had to figure out, you know, in order to make it the size that I want these guys to pass each other But also, these are going to have to be attached. I don't want them to attach right at the end here. That's going to put a whole lot of tension on the bezel itself, which is fine silver, and that's one issue. The other issue is that you don't really want these two, when they cross over, to be pointing like this. And if you solder them straight to the ends, you're going to have to make a sharp bend in order for them to be laying like this. So I'm going to kind of split the difference here. When I have these to the right, I'll get them closer to round or oval. And then what I'll do is I'll file these at an angle a little bit so that I can mount these slightly on the bottom, like that, at an angle, so that they'll lay relatively flat on top of the wrist, but this will kind of gradually curve into the bottom. And I think that'll work out pretty well. So we'll give that a try and see how that works. So what I did as far as length is, there's a lot of differences in the sizes of wrists that people have, and especially with a bangle that you're going to push over your wrist, it's going to be different significantly for a lot of people. So they have charts that show you the different lengths or different diameters of bangles they make, and so, a lot of them seemed real small to me, but I think with this particular one, I went with, what did I do? I think I did 7 centimeters diameter, which is a little bit bigger than most. Since the overall length all the way around the wrist would be from here to here, and these are going to overlap, they're going to be going a little bit like this, but I also have the length of the stone here to worry about, and since I'm mounting them like that, and this one like this, you know, it's okay if there's some variation in how big we decide to make it, and that's one of the advantages to a style like this, is you can adjust it for a different person. But I need to calculate in the fact that these overlap each other a little bit, so I have to deduct some from the length of the overall thing, and that's how I came up with this measurement, and that's how long I cut this to be. So, but I'm not going to leave it round like that when I attach all this stuff together, so I'm just going to bend it back right now. I feel kind of disorganized today, even though in my mind I know I'm organized. But all right, so let me put the bottom on this one. And again, I said I want this to be kind of stout, and normally I use 26 gauge sheet for the bottom. That's really thin and flimsy, and I want this to be a little bit sturdier since it's a bracelet. So I'm going to use 22, which is a little bit thicker. And I think it'll give us a little bit more durable bracelet. So I'm just going to cut off a little bit and solder this bottom on. I use quite a bit of 26, quite a bit of 18, and quite a bit of 22. Those are all pretty useful sizes. Before I do this, I want to make sure it's sitting pretty flat. To get a good solder join between the two. So with bigger bezels, it's a little challenging sometimes, because getting that much sheet that's kind of insulated by the pad down there up to the soldering temperature without melting the piece on top of it that's very vulnerable to the flame that you're holding from above, that's the challenging part. So we'll have to be real careful not to focus too much on the bezel while we're getting that sheet up hot. Sometimes people use those tripods to get underneath it. That's a good way to do it. I occasionally, on really big ones, I lift them up and focus the heat from the bottom so that it's not directly focused on the bezel itself, and that protects it from the direct flame. And then once it starts flowing, you can set it down and continue on. But I don't think I'll need to do that for this one. It's not that big. So I'm just going to load it up with solder on the inside, and we'll just see what we can do. And the thicker the sheet you go, the harder it is to get that bottom protected, because there's more mass to it. So that's why when you add, like I said, I normally use 26 gauge, and this is 22, so it's significantly thicker. A lot of people use little tiny pieces of solder on bezels. I always thought that was kind of extra work. So technically, if you if you get the whole thing up to the correct temperature and everything's fluxed well, and there's a good contact point all the way along the thing, you could put all the solder in one spot and just heat the whole thing up to temperature, and it should just wick all the way along that seam. But generally, most people won't get it perfectly flat, so there's a few gaps. And kind of spreading it out makes it a little bit easier for it to flow around there. So. I was just making sure that they were in contact with the solid on the bottom. Sometimes there's a little spot where it doesn't quite run the seam because it's not quite in contact. Give it a little tap while the solder is liquid, and you can get it to run the rest of that seam. There's a little cavity there that didn't quite flow, so putting a little, and when I say a little downward pressure, I mean very small amount. Don't push very hard because you can, when they're kind of hot like that, the metal becomes sort of brittle and fragile. And so if you push too hard, you can tear it or rip it or kind of break pieces off and stuff like that. So just a light tap sometimes pushes it down against the bottom so it flows the rest of the way. All right, so I'm just going to remove the excess sheet here. Okay, now it's time to remove that lip. I don't know why, but I kind of find filing sort of soothing. Maybe because when you finally get it to where you want it to be, it looks so clean and neat then. All right, so I believe I am not going to force you to watch me to do the same thing over again. So I'll be right back. Okay, so I finished the bezels, and I went ahead and I bent this back into kind of a circle-ish shape, and I did that so that I could find kind of the angle I need to. I want these to sit on here, like mounted that way to the bottom, and so I need to file kind of an angle this way, and so I'm going to do that now, and I'm going to have to kind of estimate a little bit. I'm thinking that's pretty good, as I get that evened up and everything. So let me get that finalized. That's pretty good. It might need to be a little bit steeper. Do this one like that. Yep, I think they need to both be a little bit steeper, so I'm going to try and do that. I feel like that's going to be a better angle. Probably can solder these both on at the same time if I can get them positioned right. Push one of these down in there. I kind of use that as a guide as to where to put this other one. I'm going to give that a go and see how it works. Cut myself some solder here. There's a lot of mass in this wire, so quite a bit of the heat is going to have to go into that in order to get it up to the temperature where the solder will stick to it. So let's get this flux dried. I'm going to put a couple of pieces of solder on each side. I'm going to do kind of a loop-de-loop on this one. You could probably straighten them out and do them one at a time, just kind of position them at the right angle. But see if we can't get them both together. This one's slumped a little bit. I think this one's probably okay. I have to go back and fix that other one. We're going to try that. I'm also going to try and pick a little bit in there just in case it doesn't want to do what it's supposed to do. Let me pick up a little extra here. It's another one of those times where it seems like you wouldn't have to heat the entire piece, you should just heat that one spot. However, silver loses heat and gains heat very quickly. So if you're focusing just on the one side, the other side is bleeding off excess heat pretty quickly. So it's important to keep heating the side up that's losing the heat for you. If that makes any sense. I didn't like the way it was positioned off one side, so I kind of heated it up again until the solder flowed, and then I pushed it a little bit over. So, okay, now that looks like it's on there, both of them. So that's really, for this particular bracelet, that's mostly what we got to do, except for cleaning it up and setting the stones and shaping it. So I'm going to go ahead and let that pickle, and then we'll come back and finish it. So stay tuned. So, one thing I would have you notice, and it looks like I still need a little bit of cleanup polishing in here because I can see some polishing marks. But I straightened it back out in order to polish it because it's much easier to get the inside parts really nice. And it just in general is easier to hold on to and get more polished up. The other thing I did was I went ahead and set one side of it, but I wanted to show you what I did. And generally, I'll put a couple of pieces of tag board in to get a feel for how high it sits in the bezel. But for this one, I did that. And then, because remember I said we have a kind of roundy bottom down here, so what I did was I cut a piece that was kind of the same size, and then I trimmed out the inside, as well as just having one solid piece that's in there. And that should give it a little kind of resting place in the center so it doesn't rock. Now, the thing I was talking about, and I did this on the other side too, is these are cut so irregularly that you'll notice up at the back here, it's pretty much flush up against the top of that edge there. But down here, there's all sorts of room. So one thing you can do, I've used this a couple of times when I have irregular stones before. If you hold it down, you know how it's going to sit in there, and then take a pin, and kind of run it along that top edge on the inside of the bezel, and do the same thing on the opposite side. And knock your stone back out. Then you have a little line down there that you can figure out where you need to file it down, because leaving it perfectly parallel with the bottom is not going to work with a stone that has kind of an edge that does that. So we're going to do a little bit of calculated filing. So I'm going to file off a lot of this. There's quite a bit on that side, quite a bit on this side, and then towards the end there'll be a little bit of waving in the middle here, probably down lower there and then up higher up here. So just have to see how it fits, but I'm going to do some filing here. Check the level I'm at here. I'm pretty close. I think I'll probably use the Dremel to fine tune it. So I'll be right back. Okay, so I cleaned it up with the Dremel a little bit to fine tune it. I'm going to set it just like I would any other cabochon. Push it in. Straight in with the flat side of my needle nose, but there we see. Chain nose, if you prefer. once you feel like you have everything pushed up tight as you can, then I'm going to use the rounded outer part of the needle nose here to burnish it. So I rub that top edge. And I'm going to, after I'm done with this, I'll go back and I'll hit this with a real fine polishing wheel on the very top of the bezel here to clean it up. Get rid of any marks I've left by pushing down like this. Alright, one other thing we need to do is I wanted these to not be straight. I want them to bend a little bit. So I'm going to try and I'll actually use the table here a little bit so you can see this. This is the edge of the table. I think I want to bend this one just a little bit this way. Just trying to give it a little bit of a curve like that. And then the other one I have go the other direction. Try and get them kind of similarly curved like that. I've never quite made one of these, so I think I'm doing what I need to do. I guess we'll find out. Now when we bring them back up together like this, I'm mostly just hand shaping these right now. I may put it on the bracelet mandrel in a minute to fine tune it. But it probably doesn't hurt also to do a little bit of work hardening on these parts. You know, we've been heating it over and over again, which anneals it, makes it softer. So if I want it to maintain its shape, sometimes I do a little bit of this. I think you could probably make this round or oval. Depends on what someone wants, I guess. This one came out a little big, I think, but that's because I've never made one quite like this before. So I'll probably do a little bit of final shaping and some repolishing to make sure everything kind of looks nice and symmetrical, but I think that's kind of a cool looking bracelet, honestly. I like that it's got the natural fossil kind of thing going on, but it's also kind of sleek and modern looking. So, like I said, I'll get it polished up better on the top and shaped a little better, and we'll get some pictures of it. All right, well that was the Orthoceras bangle bracelet. I hope you enjoyed the video. I thought it came out pretty cool. It's kind of a simple design, but I think it's a fun and unique way to try to use some different fossil kind of materials that you find. So I have a few ideas about using some ammonites in a bracelet as well, so I may come back to that at some point. Either way, thanks for visiting. Make sure to hit the video description for the various links that are relevant. You can buy me a coffee, which helps with supplies and materials. You can check out my Patreon links and maybe consider signing up for that. That's a really nice community over there. I'd love to have you check that out and maybe consider joining. Lots of talented people over there with lots of knowledge, so I'm learning as much from them as they are from me, probably more. So it's a nice community. There's also a link to my merch store if you want to get one of my new notebooks behind me there. I finally got some more. This one that I've been using for a while is almost full, so I need a new one. So we ordered some of the other styles. But check those things out. Check out a few more videos, and I'd love to have you subscribe. So thanks for watching. Take care. Happy silversmithing.